You know, what if I told you that the most dangerous trap you could ever fall into isn't set with force, but with a smile? At its core, that's what a confidence game is. It's not just about lying. It's a masterclass in persuasion, and it works by tapping into something that's fundamental to all of us, our natural instinct to trust.
Man, this quote from Lewis Carroll just nails it, doesn't it? It's chilling because it's so accurate. A real con artist doesn't come at you like a threat. No, they welcome you in. They make the trap look like the safest place in the world, all with those gently smiling jaws.
All right, so to really get how a con works, we got to break it down. First, we'll look at the players, the grifter, and their target, the mark. Then we'll walk through the whole playbook, how they build trust, how they get you totally committed, and maybe most importantly, why we so often miss the obvious red flags. And finally, we'll get into the aftermath and the very human need to believe that makes this all possible.
Okay, let's kick things off with the two main characters in this whole drama. The grifter, that's the con artist, and the mark, who is their target. And right off the bat, you have to get this idea out of your head that this is just about a bad guy tricking a dumb person. Oh no, it is so much more complicated than that.
This is such a critical point. Con artists aren't really born evil. I mean, take the story of Ferdinand de Mara, the guy they called the Great Imposter. He actually posed as a naval surgeon during the Korean War. He wasn't some born criminal. He was the perfect example of how grifters are made when a certain kind of personality meets the perfect opportunity. A need pops up, like a shortage of doctors, and someone with the right disposition just steps in. They show up right when they seem to be needed the most. This quote really gets to the absolute core of why we fall for this stuff. We've all heard the saying, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. But here's the thing. We tend to think that rule only applies to other people. When someone else gets an amazing deal, we think, oh, they're getting scammed. But when it happens to us, well, that's different. We feel like we've earned it, like we deserve it. And that feeling of deservingness, well, it creates a massive blind spot.
Okay, so we know the players. Now let's get into the first stage of the game, the setup. And this is so important. In this phase, the grifter isn't trying to get your money. Not yet. They're going after something way more valuable. They're building an emotional connection. They are manufacturing trust. Have you ever been to a fortune teller and they say something that feels so specific, so deeply you, that you're just blown away? Well, there's a good chance it's because of a mental shortcut we all have called egocentric anchoring. A con artist will say something super general, like, you're often your own worst critic. And because we're all stuck in our own heads, we instantly fill in the details from our own lives and think, wow, they really get me. It feels personal, and boom, instant connection.
So a huge part of the setup is what's called the play. Think of your brain as having two systems. You've got the slow, logical, rational system that likes to analyze things. And then you have the fast, gut-feeling, emotional system that just reacts. The con artist's entire goal is to get you to use that emotional system. They'll tell a great story or create a sense of urgency to make you feel instead of think. It's how they bypass all your defenses.
This line from Shakespeare perfectly describes a classic con technique, the Mark Antony gambit. See, Mark Antony pretended to agree with the people who were against Caesar right before he swayed them to his side. A con artist does the same thing. They'll get on your side first. They'll say stuff like, look, I'm not here to sell you anything. By the time the real pitch comes, you've already decided they're one of the good guys, and your guard is completely down. So, once that foundation of trust is built, the grifter moves into the next phase. It's time to set the hook. But this isn't about getting you to make one big decision. Oh no, it's about getting a series of tiny little yeses that pull you deeper and deeper into the game before you even know what's happening.
This is a classic of psychology, the foot-in-the-door technique. Studies have shown that if you can get someone to agree to a really small request, like just answering a simple question, they are way more likely to agree to a much bigger request later. And why is that? Well, our brains are wired to be consistent. Once we say yes to something small, we start to think, well, this person must be okay, and it gets easier and easier to keep saying yes.
And if you want to see just how devastating this can be, you have to hear the story of Gregor McGregor. Back in the 1820s, this guy convinced hundreds of people to invest everything they had to move to a made-up country he called Poyez. He didn't ask for it all at once. He started small. First, he sold them some land certificates, then government bonds, then positions in the army. Each little yes made the next one seem perfectly logical, all while he was leading them straight to ruin.
And the scale of this con, it is just staggering. In today's money, McGregor's fraud would be worth over £3.6 billion. Let that sink in. This wasn't some quick street scam. It was a massive, world-changing deception built on nothing more than a good story and the psychology of saying yes over and over again.
But here's the thing. No con can go on forever. Eventually, the story starts to crack. The promises start to fray. This is the stage where glaring red flags start popping up all over the place. And the truly baffling question is, why do the victims, who are often really smart people, so often fail to see them?
Well, one of the biggest psychological forces at work here is the sunk cost fallacy. You've probably felt this yourself. Once we've put time, money, or our emotions into something, it becomes incredibly hard to walk away, even when it's obviously a disaster. Quitting feels like admitting we made a huge mistake, so instead we do something irrational. We double down, hoping we can somehow turn it all around.
And then there's this wild phenomenon, perfectly shown by the famous invisible gorilla experiment. It's called inattentional blindness. Basically, when you are so laser-focused on the prize, the big financial return, the perfect partner, your brain can literally fail to see things that are right in front of your face. Those red flags are there, plain as day. But to the mark, they're as invisible as a man in a gorilla suit walking through a basketball game.
So this brings us to the end. The game is over, the con is complete, the money's gone. But what comes next is often a strange kind of quiet. You'd expect outrage and police reports, but what you often get is silence. And the reasons for that silence tell us just as much about ourselves as the con itself.
So why don't more victims come forward? Well, the number one reason, by far, is just profound, gut-wrenching shame. People are terrified of being seen as a fool. They worry about their career, their reputation, what their friends and family are going to think. And to make it all worse, a really good con artist is a master at twisting things around to make the victim feel like it was all their own fault.
And then you see one of the most bizarre things in all of human psychology, sometimes called the fix. This is when the con has been completely exposed as a fraud, and some of the victims still refuse to believe it. They'll actually defend the person who ripped them off. When a pair of evangelists were on trial, their followers were in the courtroom shouting, "Amen." The need to believe that their first decision was the right one can be so strong that it literally overrides reality. So, when you pull back and look at the whole picture, what's the big takeaway? Why have confidence games been around forever, and why do they still work? Well, it's because they tap into one of the deepest, most powerful parts of being human, our absolute need to believe. Now, after hearing all this, it's easy to think, that's it, I'm never trusting anyone again. But honestly, that's not the lesson here at all. In fact, studies show that trusting people tend to be happier and more successful. Trust is what holds society together. The real goal isn't to become a cynic. The goal is to become more aware of our own biases, our emotional triggers, and our deepest desires. Because that self-awareness, that's our best defense.
I think this quote from the psychologist William James just says it all. Our willingness to live on a chance, that's what gives us hope. We are fundamentally wired to believe in good things, in better stories, in a brighter future. That's not a flaw in our design. It's central to what makes us human. A con artist just takes that beautiful, hopeful part of our nature and twists it for their own gain.
And so I'll just leave you with this final question to think about. Now that you understand these powerful psychological forces at play, our desire for a special fate, our need to be consistent, our unshakable hope for a better story, how can you move through the world? Not with cynicism, but with a more thoughtful, more critical, and more self-aware approach to the stories you choose to believe.